Now we're still looking at rational expressions, right? We talked about yesterday what a rational expression is. It's basically fractions. That's the fancy word of fractions, but we're including letters. And now we're going to add and subtract. Now we multiplied and divided yesterday, but for addition and subtraction, we need to have the common denominator. So first of all, I start seeing if I can factor anything just to see if there's any common factors. I'm just looking at my denominators, okay? I'm just looking at the denominators. I'm looking at those at the bottom. The 3, well, there's nothing I can do with the 3. 5b minus 4, I start thinking, can I possibly do the distributive property backwards? Is there is there a number I can divide 5 and 4 by to make them smaller? And I'm like, no, in this case, there's nothing I can do. Okay, so first thing again, we try to see if they have any common factors. Second thing we do, let me combine my factors. So at the bottom, my factors are 3 and 5b minus 4. All right, I'm going to combine whatever I have left. I'm going to combine my factors. I was looking to see if there were any common factors, so I just write my common factors once, but in this case, there's none. Okay, so looking at my first fraction. See, I'm gonna look at my common denominators. I'm looking at this parentheses at the bottom. Looking at my first fraction. Okay, so what else? What does my common denominator have? When I say common denominator, I mean what I have highlighted. What does my common denominator has? But the first fraction does not. And you guys are going to be, well, a 5b minus 4. Okay, let me write it right here for the moment. 5b minus 4, okay? So again, I was looking at my common denominator, the thing that I highlighted, and then I said, what does my common denominator have that my first fraction does not? Okay, so it was a 5b minus 4. And then my second fraction, to begin with, let me put this b plus 4 by itself. And then I'm going to say, what am I missing? What does my common denominator have that my second fraction does not? Then I'm going to say, well, 3. Okay. My fractions, there should be a plus in between them. Okay. So number 12 is going to be easy. It's going to be fine. But number 11, the one we're working on, it has a minus, okay? So I said it has to has a plus. If it doesn't have a plus, change it to a plus, but give the negative sign to one of the fractions, one of the parentheses on your second fraction. So let me give the negative to that -3. Okay, so again, change it to a plus, but give the negative sign to everything inside of one of your parentheses. Okay, so let's take a look at what I have now. Now, let me emphasize that my fraction is going to be long. So on the top, it's going to be a lot, okay? What I'm going to do now, let me get rid of parentheses. The first fraction, let me distribute the 4. So 4 times 5b, that gives me 20b. And then 4 times a -4, that gives me a -16. Except I'm getting rid of parentheses on the top of my fraction. Don't worry about the parentheses at the bottom. Now on the second fraction, let me distribute the -3. So that gives me -3b minus 12. Okay. The bottom of the fraction, it's a 3 and a 5b minus 4. I'm not going to do anything with my denominator, okay? Now on the numerator, so looking at the top, combine your like terms. I see 20b minus 3b, right? 20 minus 3 is 17. So let me call that 17b. And then I see a -16 minus 12. That's negative 16 and a negative 12. That gives me a negative 28. And that is it. All right, let's take a look at another example. Let's take a look at number 12. To begin with, let me look for any common factors, okay? So looking at the bottom of the first fraction, I feel that I can divide each by 2, and that gives me 5x plus 2. Right, notice I did distributive property backwards. My second fraction, it just has a 2. Okay, so let me draw a big fraction here, and let me look for the common factors. So I see both have a 2, right? So let me write a 2. I'm writing my factors. I'm not going to write all the common factors. Common basically means that both fractions have it. So this 2 with this 2, I'm only going to write it once. And then everything else, right? So 5x plus 2. Okay, so I found my common denominator. Let me highlight my common denominator. It's 2 factors, 2 times 5x plus 2. I look at my first fraction. I'm just looking at the denominator. And then I ask myself, what does the common denominator has that my first fraction does not have? Just looking at the denominators again. And I'm like, well, they look identical. So there's nothing that I'm missing. So don't do anything to the first fraction. Okay. Now pay attention to the second fraction. What does my common denominator have that my second fraction does not have? And then you would be like, well, it seems like I'm missing the 5x plus 2. So I'm going to multiply the top by 5x plus 2. Okay. Let me erase this. Okay, so now my first my first fraction is just a 6x. I'm not doing anything to the 6x. There's a plus in between my fractions, so that's a good thing. I don't have to deal with the negative like I did in number 11. But what I'm going to do, I have to multiply this to parentheses. I distribute the number by itself. So in this case, the 5, I distribute to the other parentheses. So when I distribute the other parentheses, that gives me plus 25x plus 10. Okay. So again, at the bottom, I have a 2 and a 5x plus 2, right? My common denominator, not doing anything. On the top, combine your like terms. 6x plus 25x, that's 31x. And then the plus 10, and that's it. All right, let's take a look at a couple more examples. I start by looking at common factors. So my first fraction, it's an x plus 6. Nothing I can factor out. My second fraction, let's see, it's a 2x. So to begin with, I'm going to have an x plus 6 times 2x. I don't see any common factors. Some of you might be looking at, Mr. Leonzo, I can simplify the second fraction. Okay. Yeah, we can simplify the second fraction. I'll come back to that later, in case we cannot see it. If you guys can see, I can simplify again. I will come back to that later. Okay, so let me highlight my common denominator, this thing. And then my first fraction. And I ask myself, what does my first fraction, what does my common factored, what does my common denominator have that my first fraction does not? So again, let me ask this. What does my common denominator have that my first fraction does not? And you guys will be a 2x. Okay. Then I look at the second fraction. Let me look at the denominator of that. And again, what does my common denominator have that my second fraction does not? And then it will be an x plus 6. Okay. There's a plus in between my fractions. So I have to switch that. I mean, there's a minus in between my fractions. I have to switch that to a plus and give the negative to one of my factors. So I have two parentheses on the second fraction, give the negative to everything inside of one of the parentheses. So I'm going to choose this negative 4x. Okay, so let's see. On the first fraction, the 2x, the one that is by itself, I'm going to distribute 2x times x and 2x times a negative 2. So that gives me 2x squared minus 4x. On the second fraction, let me distribute the negative 4. So it's going to give me negative 4x squared minus 24x. So at the bottom, I have an x plus 6 and a 2x. I'm not doing anything to that just yet. On the top, let me combine my like terms. So when it comes to x squared, I get a negative 2x squared, right? A 2x squared minus 4x squared. It's a negative 2x squared. And then I can also combine the negative 4x with the negative 24x. That gives me a negative 28x. And you fix that x right there. All right, so I see, again, at the bottom, I have an x plus 6 and a 2x. When we started working this question, I mentioned we could have simplified the second fraction before we worked. But then I said, I'll come back to that. Just in case we did not notice, I'm more like, on the numerator, on the top. It seems like I'm just focused on the top. It seems like I can factor a positive 2 out. I could factor a negative 2, but because I see a positive 2 at the bottom, I'm just going to factor a positive 2. So it seems like I can factor a positive 2. And I can also factor an x, right? I can take out an x out of each. So I'm going to factor a 2x. So again, I'm going to do my distributive property backwards. I'm going to divide numbers-wise, I'm going to divide each by 2. Letter-wise, I'm going to remove an x. So that gives me, let's see, a negative x minus 14. Now here, this 2x with this 2x cancel out. And my answer will be negative x minus 14 over x plus 6. If you would have simplified at the very beginning, that 4x over 2x was just 2 over 1, sure, things would have been a little bit more easier. Okay. Now, what I'm trying to say here it is, if you simplify first, the work is easier. But if you don't simplify, eventually the question will be simplified, like we see here, number 13. All right, now let's take a look at number 14. My focus right now is at the denominators. Can I factor anything out of each? On the first fraction, nothing I can do. The second fraction, nothing I can do. So my common denominator will be a 2n and then n plus 3. Okay. Now I look at my common denominator and look at my first fraction. Then I ask myself, is there anything that my common denominator has that my first fraction does not. I'm like, yeah, my common denominator has an n plus 3 that my first fraction does not have. Because see how my common denominators, there's two parentheses, 2n and n plus 3. The 2n, I already have it. I just don't have the n plus 3. Okay. Then I look at the second fraction. Is there anything that my common denominator have that my second fraction does not? And then I'm going to say, yeah, the 2n. Okay. And then I look at the sign, at the symbol, at the sign in between my fractions. It's supposed to be a plus, which is good. It has a plus sign. Now, if it had a minus, I will distribute it to a parentheses on my second fraction. Okay, speaking of parentheses, let me put this inside parentheses. So again, if it was a minus in between my fractions, I will change it to plus and give the negative to everything inside of one of my parentheses for the second fraction. Now let me multiply things out. On the first fraction, let me multiply the 5 to the second parentheses. So that's going to give me 5n plus 15. On the second fraction, let me distribute the 2n to both terms of the second parentheses, and that's going to give me plus 2n squared minus 12n. Okay, so my common denominator, it's a 2n and n plus 3. Don't worry about multiplying everything out. Leave it in factor form. So leave it in parentheses. That's fine. Let me combine my like terms on the top. So the highest exponent is 2n squared. So 2n squared. When it comes to n, I see a 5n minus 12n. So let me call that minus 7n. And then there's a plus 15. That's it. Make sure you guys get your common denominator. And then you guys can work that out.